Welcome to our Next Practices live webinar. Today we have the distinct privilege of interviewing and having as a guest speaker Professor Marty Linsky, who some of you may know of him. And Professor Linsky has taught at the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government for something like well over 35 years. I think you can correct me later. He has, of course, written numerous very famous books on the topic of leadership, and he's also been a co-founder of the Cambridge Leadership Associate. So, as I said, it is an honor and a great privilege to have the opportunity to speak with him today. And well, I have some questions that I'd love to hear his thoughts on. And if that's okay with you, Marty, we'd just go ahead and get started. Is that okay?
Great. Good morning, Araceli. It's nice to see you.
Very good.
Nice to be with all of your colleagues.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So to start, Marty, there is a famous statement that you often make. I know sometimes it shows, well, it shows in different places. One of them is shows on your book, Leadership on the Line. And the statement says the following. It says, you place yourself on the line when you tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. Let me say that again for those who've not heard it before. You place yourself on the line when you tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. Marty, what does this mean? Could you please tell us about it? And does this statement apply to leadership in the current crisis? And if so, how?
Well, actually, I think it applies to leadership in the current crisis even more than it does in, quote, normal times, whatever those are going to be. This is about differentiating between exercising leadership and exercising authority. Most everyone on this webinar operates from a position of authority. You have a role, you manage people, you have subordinates. And what people want from people in authority in normal times is to provide direction, tell them where they're going, tell them where the organization is going, protection from outside threats. Here's how we're going to make it through. Here's how we're going to survive. Here's how we're going to do better than the competition. Here's how we're going to overcome the challenges. And order, keeping things calm. But exercising leadership is about helping people face up to realities they don't want to face up to. It is that difference between telling people what they want to hear, which is good news and comfort food, and telling people what they need to hear, which is sometimes bad news or discomforting or discombobulating. In this period of time and we're in now, the most powerful characteristic, most relevant characteristic for our conversation is that we are operating in a period of radical uncertainty. No one knows the answers. It is very difficult for people in authority to not know the answers. Mm-hmm. And if you're like me, sometimes you've given people answers because they expect you to, even when you didn't know the answer, because there's so much pressure on people in authority to give people answers. No one knows the answers right now. And so what that means, the implications of that for people who are managers and supervisors and CEOs, well, the implications of that is that you have to operate in a different way because you cannot provide people what they want, which is clarity and certainty, tell us how it's going to be. So the behaviors in the midst of this time of radical uncertainty have to be very different for people in authority than they are in, quote, normal times.
Yeah. So Marty, I think, did I just, okay, yeah. Sorry, I thought I had lost you for a second there. So, could you, I know you've kind of touched on that just for a second now. So what is different then about practicing leadership in times of crisis or times of extreme times of extreme stress such as this one, and
Okay.
what are the challenges
Okay.
of
Well,
practicing leadership?
how do you help people um, tolerate radical uncertainty when what we want as human beings is clarity? That's the challenge. That's one way of framing the challenge for people in authority. How do you help people tolerate uncertainty? I think it begins with presence. Now, you can't be physically present with people the way you can be with someone who's hurting in some way in normal times. So what does presence look like in this circumstances? I think there are three elements of presence. First is communication. Um, I don't think you can over communicate under these circumstances. Sending people emails every day, talking with your key people every day. It is much less what you say than that you are constantly part of their lives. You're there for them. People know that you're there. They can feel you there even though you're not physically present. When people start telling you they're sick and tired of your emails, then you know you're doing a good job. There is no such thing as over communicating under these circumstances. That's the first element of presence. The second element of presence is empathy. I think every conversation with a colleague, a subordinate, or a superior should begin with some question like, how's it going on your end? How are you feeling? What's going on? It is one of the realities is that each of us is going through a very different journey. You know, depending on where you are, depending on the prevalence of the virus, depending on the rules under which you're operating, depending on whether you know anybody that's been sick or not, depending on whether you've been sick yourself, depending on whether you have kids at home or not, all those qualities, every one of us is going through a different journey. And what that requires on the part of managers and senior authorities is deep, radical empathy. You have to ask people how they're doing all the time. You have to, because this is not a wholesale world we're living in. It is a retail world, even though we're making some wholesale rules. So that's the second piece of presence. First is communication. There's no such thing as over communication. Second is empathy, radical empathy, constantly checking in with people and asking them how they're doing, what's going on your end. And third, which is sometimes the most difficult for people in authority, is vulnerability. People who you work with, people who work for you, they want you to be human in this context. They want to know that you are experiencing some of the same ups and downs, emotional ups and downs, and challenges that they're feeling. And that requires you to be more vulnerable than is demanded of your role in normal times. So talking about your own experience, talking about, you know, if you've got little kids at home or teenagers at home, what is it like to have them around all the time? Talking about your own ups and downs, and primarily being able to say to them, we do not know. I cannot tell you what the future is going to look like. So I think that, to me, is the beginning of how you need to operate differently under the circumstances that we're all immersed in. Communication, empathy, and vulnerability.
So Marty, would you say that then these are the things that people need from their leaders, from those providing leadership? Is there maybe anything else that they might need in these times?
Well, as I was suggesting before, I think the content of the message is less important them a message. But saying that, I would suggest that there are a couple of content pieces which are pretty central here. The first is to maintain a both relentless optimism and brutal realism at the same time. I don't know if you've seen the new book about Churchill during the war. It's a kind of bestseller on the bestseller list. I should remember the name and don't, but I could look it up while we're talking here. But Churchill really embodied this. You know, at the darkest moment for Great Britain, he never lost hope. He never lost optimism. He said, we will get through this. We will figure this out. But he also never sugarcoated the news for people. He never minimized the threat. He never suggested that he will take care of it. He'll fix it. He said this, we're in this together, and it is going to be very dark. It's going to be very difficult, but we're going to make it through. Now, that balance between optimism and realism is difficult to maintain. If you can do it, if you can be relentlessly optimistic and brutally realistic at the same time, then what happens is that the optimism prevents the realism from becoming cynical. Because people who are realistic but not optimistic turn out to be cynical. You know, we can't do anything, we're disempowered, we can't fix anything. The realism prevents the optimism from being naive. Oh, we're going to solve this, everything's going to be okay, you know, this is going to be over in a few months, whatever. Holding them both together is really important for people. So people experiencing you as always optimistic and hopeful and never sugarcoating the message for them. So I think that's one thing about content. The second, which is related to what we've been talking about, is to make sure you don't fall into the trap of trying to predict the future. People want to know what you think the world is going to look like on the other side of this. It is tempting to get sucked into that. I think anybody who is trying to predict the future now is foolish. It's work avoidance. On the other hand, that is very different than trying to create the future. So to me, the challenge for people in authority is not to succumb to the pressure to predict the future, but to emphasize that we have an opportunity to create the future. That the decisions that we make now, the choices that we make, the experiences that we have can help us think about what kind of a future we want, and we can begin to make decisions now which will increase the chances of the future being the way we want it to be. So I think this distinction between predicting the future and creating the future is very important. And what does it mean to create the future? It means to see this moment of discombobulation as an opportunity. Now, what does that look like? Well, one of the things that my experience is, and my experience in working with senior authorities in all kinds of organizations, governmental, private, nonprofit organizations, is that this is an opportunity. People are open to ideas and to experiments that they wouldn't have been open to 6 months ago or a year ago or 5 years ago. So you've got a kind of an open field here to play around, to experiment, to try some ideas out that maybe some pet ideas that you've been keeping on the shelf, and now here's an opportunity to try them out. It is also an opportunity to try and identify what are the enduring values in your organization. What are the values that you want to preserve going forward? And trying to use that as a filter to help you think about the decisions you're going to make. I mean, I'm thinking about now as we're talking, I'm thinking about which I know is not on point with people on this webinar, but I'm thinking about a school network of charter schools that I'm involved with, and the decisions they're making about when to open, how to open, what kind of, they're all about our commitment to providing the best quality education for the 5,000 kids in our network, and trying to use that as a filter. You know, is this going to be consistent with our commitment to provide excellence in education? That's the filter we use. Helps cement those values, and it helps us not to make decisions today which are short-term, under pressure, but to think about them as representing long-term commitments.
Yes. So true, Marty. I mean, I think you're, of course, as usual, right on point. But yeah, it's that's precisely, I think, one of the reasons why we decided to go ahead and think about these webinars, to not only give people, our audience, a space to think about what is going on and share what is going on, but also to help them understand that what we're going through is going to require experiments. We're going to have to experiment, and we're going to have to learn from what we try, and we'll have to learn from what others are trying, and build that future together in the current reality. And as we move forward, rather than looking at the past and looking at what we normally call best practices, we need to think about it as next practices, which is what we're calling these webinars, next practices. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's risk involved, of course, because experiments can fail.
Well, let me push back very gently, Araceli.
Yeah, sure, please.
One of the benefits of the language of experiment is distinguished from the language of problem solving, is that experiments never fail. You're testing a hypothesis, and if it doesn't work, you learn something. You learn something about your people, you learn something about the system, you learn something about people's capacities, their tolerances. So if you think about it as an experiment, look, let's try this, let's see what happens. Then all your chips are not on the table. You know, and the stakes are lower, and you're saying, hey, look, let's try this. We'll try this for a month. We'll evaluate it. We'll see what we learn, see if it works. I mean, what's happening now, right in this moment, you know, is we're running an experiment. You know, what does it mean to engage in a conversation? And you're trying several different modes. You know, one mode is you and I having this conversation. Another mode is asking people to ask questions. And we're trying to figure out what might work under these circumstances. There's no failure, there's only learning, right? It's very different than saying, here's the fix, you know, I'm going to solve the problem, this is going to be the solution, life is going to be better afterwards. Then you're raising the stakes, and then you are risking failure. I think the language of experiment helps a lot in this situation.
Excellent. Yeah, totally agreed. Marty, you often talk about staying in the game. So can you tell us a little bit of what that means, and how can those practicing leadership in times such as this one can stay in the game while learning and adapting?
I think there are a couple of elements to that. Realizing that we're all under stress of different levels and of different kinds. I think one of the ways you can stay in the game, both in terms of your own self and in terms of your the trust of the people that you work with, is to be generous. Generous to them and generous to yourself. And I mean that in several different ways. One is to be forgiving. You know, you're going to screw up. People are going to screw up. People are going to say things that they later wish they hadn't said. People are going to make mistakes. We're all fumbling around because none of us have ever been where we are before. There's no expert that can tell us how to operate under these circumstances. We're moving in the dark. And what that means, I think, in terms of staying in the game is to be forgiving and to be generous to people, to be generous to yourself. I mean, I've seen people who I've been working with over the past couple of months who have a hard time they're very hard on themselves. And I don't think that's a way of staying in the game. You know, being generous to yourself when you screw up, when you make a mistake, don't beat up on yourself, and acknowledge it and move on. So I think that's one piece of staying in the game. The other, which is a little complicated, I think, to talk about is, but it's part of being generous, is to take care of yourself. The times we're in demand that you be at your best. And you can't be at your best if you're not getting exercise, and if you're not eating decently, and if you're not getting good night's sleep, and if you're not experiencing loved ones in the best way you can, you're not going to be at your best. And people need you to be at your best now. It is not self-indulgent to take an afternoon off. It's not self-indulgent to, if you don't have anything first thing in the morning, to go out for a long walk. It is part of helping you be your best self under conditions of high stress and uncertainty. So I think that's about how to stay in the game. You know, be forgiving and take care of yourself.
Excellent. Excellent. Great recommendations. Absolutely. So we have some questions. Samantha sent me a note that we have someone, our friend Imran from Pakistan, who would like to ask a question. So okay. Sam, would it be a good time to have that happen now?
Sure.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, I think so. So Imran, can you hear us now? And I see that you've shared your video. Are you able to hear us? Okay, great. So please feel free to make your comments, questions. You're ready to go.
Hi, Marty. How are you? Hi, Araceli.
Hi.
My question and my comments are that we are living in the age of uncertainty. And everybody is facing, as Marty has said, and Araceli has endorsed, that we are facing emotional challenges, social pressures, and financial crunch. So first of all, we all need to be rational and immediately adopt the new normal. That is very, very important. And as Marty has said, that, you know, people have to be generous. Generosity, yes, it's very true that, you know, generosity is the key element of survival. But people can be generous. How can organizations show their generosity towards their employees, because they have the limit? And I've seen that a lot of companies, the big companies, are filing bankruptcy. So this is one of my questions, that, you know, we as a whole, we are in a serious puzzle. So we need to get out of that. Secondly, what we have experienced here in Pakistan, that we have cut down our 1/5 staff and told them to work from home. Now, our dilemma is that, you know, when you tell people that you have to work from home, so they think that's holiday. So you know, they are not geared up. They are not that engaging themselves. We can't call them to the office because the situation is not good for them, at least present environment. But again, then we are facing an issue that their redundancies are increasing, and they're emotionally being downgraded. So this is my dilemma that I'm going through it. What should we do?
Well, let me Imam, let me think about two different pieces of what you said. the first is when an organization is in trouble financially, and whether it's bankruptcy and reorganization, or whether it's laying people off, whatever the consequences of that are. My experience is that how you treat people into those circumstances is as important as any other piece. And I think there are two elements of that. One is when you're delivering bad news, to do it humanely. You know, the lawyers and the HR specialists tell you that when you're letting people go, to do it quickly and don't give them any reasons, because they might sue, you know. I think that from a leadership point of view, that's exactly wrong. That it is not only a moral imperative to treat people well who are going to be disadvantaged by the decisions that you made, but it is also a managerial imperative, because other people, their friends, will calibrate their commitment to you in part by how you treat the people who are going to be hurt by your decisions. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I've seen a couple of instances recently where people got fired by email. I think that is a disaster, not just because it's inhumane, but because it sends a terrible signal to the rest of the people. So it feels to me that's the first piece. It's not about, although I think there are decisions you can make. For example, let me give you an example. My son has 20 people working for him in a company that he and his partner founded. And they were bought by a larger company, and they were required to take some pay cuts during the pandemic. And he worked really hard. First of all, he pushed hard on his bosses to give him flexibility. And second, they made a decision that the senior people in the organization would take a disproportionately large share of the hit, so that the people making less money, actually the people making less money wouldn't have to take any pay cut at all. And that had a huge impact on people. I say this, I don't say this in a political way, but you know, Trump, when Trump played golf this weekend, he was sending a very powerful message to the people who want to get on with opening the economy, and a very powerful negative message to the people who are hurting. You know, the message he was sending to the latter group was that he doesn't really care about them, you know. He's going to go on with his life and do the things that make him happy and give him fun, even though they are suffering enormously as a consequence of the pandemic and a consequence of the way the federal government handled it. So I think modeling the behavior that you expect of other people is really important. Now, that brings me to the second point in men, is how do you help people who see working from home as a vacation? That was your language. Treat it differently. Well, I think there are two things that occur to me. One just builds on what I said, which is you acting differently. You know, if you are present all the time, if you're checking in with them all the time, if you are producing work yourself that they can see, that is going to send a very strong message. Because if you are more or less absent from their lives, they're going to conjure up that you're out on the golf course, you know. Yes. And if they think you're on the golf course, they might as well be sitting in the backyard as well. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, giving people some, making the tasks more concrete than they usually are. So giving people deadlines and concrete tasks so that they have some boundaries, some guardrails. I mean, one of the roles of people in authority is to set the boundaries, to set the ground rules, to set the guardrails. And it is useful, I think, in these times when people are trying to figure out what does it mean to work at home, and what does it mean to work at home if I've got 2 little kids, and what does it mean to work at home if I'm all alone and I'm not talking to anybody all day. Trying to make it as easy for them to adapt by giving them concrete tasks, concrete deadlines. Webinar, for example, I see on our webinar here that there are more people not on video than are on video. So I know that when I'm on a webinar and I'm not on video, I can look at my email and I can read the paper and I can think I'm listening. And so it might be thank you, Sandra. I didn't mean to guilt trip you, Sandra. I think, for example, you can say to people, we want to see your face. We want to make eye contact you. It's not the same thing as being in the same room together, but I can see the expression on your face. And so let's all, now I think that has a huge impact on, in my experience over the past 2 months, the meetings where everybody is on video are very different than the meetings where half the people are and half the people aren't, So that I'm offer that as a way of kind of thinking about how you can create some guardrails for people that will help them perform in this uncertainty the way you want them to perform. I don't know if that's useful or not, Inman, but those are the thoughts that occur to me when you raise the question.
Excellent, very true. I've already practicing it. I'm already making life of my colleagues miserable, being present, pushing them.
Yes.
That try to get them engaged. That's very important.
Yes.
And I think productivity overall of the organization has increased.
Oh, that's great. That's really exciting. Imran, can you tell us a little bit about what you're experiencing in Pakistan? Because most of us on this call are not in Pakistan, and you don't get a sense of what it's like there.
Mm-hmm.
In Pakistan, frankly speaking, initial about 1 month was really frightening.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of fear about COVID-19, and everybody was trying to take care of that. But now, frankly speaking, for the last 2 weeks, it has practically fizzled down. Everybody's out. Everybody's couple of people are following masks and sanitizers, but fear is gone. Fear is gone, and cases our testing is not that adequate, but still cases are there. But this is a good luck to us is that the critical cases are very, 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 very less, and that is a good part. That people are not basically that fear is not there now. But still, as an organizations, we are very careful. We are trying to follow all the WHO guidelines. We have the government is following the guidelines. The government is trying to educate people that for God's sake, this is a serious thing. You have to protect yourselves. And we have cut down our strengths as well. The best thing which happened to Pakistan, that this digitalization, which could have come 10 years later, this has arrived. And this is in the room as well. So, So everybody, Zoom, Skype, WhatsApp, FaceTime, we're doing meetings. Everything is digitalized. This is something which is a silver lining. And what I see is, I was talking to one of my friends at Harvard, that we have to take this this challenge as an opportunity and create an opportunity from this diversity and move forward, because this is the new normal, and we have to carve out our future targets and focus on that.
Yes.
So this is, I think, we are pretty good. Government is doing its best. God is very kind to us. Things are normal as far as health is concerned, but pretty bad as far as the economy is concerned. Because what problem with us is, and I think it's in everywhere, that small businesses are the most hurt. Shops, restaurants, gyms, where the rental is on, and there's no business is there. So that is a very, very critical part. And let's hope that things move forward. And as far as you mentioned about the golf, so I was the one who was the most happy that golf courses are open now, and I am playing 18 holes every day. So apart from the work.
Right.
Thank you very much.
So things are good.
Thanks, Imran.
Thank you very much, Imran, for sharing with us. I think Sam has an announcement, right?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to remind everyone, now we're at the portion of our session where we can have any participants share any stories with us or experiences, or we can follow up with additional questions if you have any. So in order to do that, in order to share, if you go to the participant tab, if you're using a desktop or a laptop, at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, I can't talk today, I'm sorry. There's the participant tab. You would select that and there's an icon to raise your hand. If you're using a phone, that toolbar is at the top of your screen. So just select that in order to raise your hand. I'll select you and then I'll unmute your audio, and you're free to unmute your video if you'd like to share. And then of course you can always just continue to direct any questions or comments to the chat function. Okay, wow, that was fast. So it looks like we do have a hand raised. However, Marty, I do have a question that someone sent to us anonymously that I'm just going to go ahead and ask the question. Then if you could just address it to everyone, that'd be great. So the question is persons are understandably very worried about possible layoffs, redundancies, pay cuts, and such. How should leaders be addressing this apprehension?
I think it requires this combination of realism and optimism. Don't tell people anything that you don't know, but keep telling them that you don't know. Don't try to predict when there will be decisions that you can't control the timing of. So, you know, it's about constantly, if you think about it as you're not trying to solve people's problems, you're trying to increase their tolerance for uncertainty. Mm-hmm. So being able to say to them, I know that you're worried, that's empathy. I know that this is a really hard time for you. I really wish I could be clearer, and we will be clearer as soon as we can be clearer. I am hopeful that the impact, the negative impact, will be as minimal as we can make it. And I will be as honest with you as I can as soon as I can. And saying that over and over again helps people get more comfort, not real comfort, more comfort than anxiety. At least they know that you're thinking about them, that you understand their anxieties, and you are committed to giving them as much information as you can as soon as you can. I think that's really the best you can do. And I would encourage you to think about your job as building up their tolerance for uncertainty, not as solving their problem for them.
Great, thank you so much, Marty. I really appreciate that response. So it looks like we have someone who would like to share, Denise Simmons. So Denise, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute your audio now. Just let me know if you can hear us.
I can hear you.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi, Denise.
Hi, Marty. Thank you for sharing that. That found a number of things you said sort of hit several ideas I have in my head.
Denise, could you tell me, other people know who you are, but I don't know who you are. Could you tell me a little bit about where you are and how come you're on this webinar?
I don't think anyone else knows who I am. There's probably only one person. My name is Denise Simmons. I'm an associate professor in civil and coastal engineering at the University of Florida. My research focuses actually on humans. So really in leadership development, how students do that through co-curricular activities. I particularly am interested in issues of disparity and study those as a part of my work.
Great. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I spent a number of years in industry, Marty. This idea of mixing optimism and realism is really where I wanted to begin maybe the questioning with you. And the thing that came to my mind as I sort of said, I absolutely believe that and absolutely believe in keeping those in balance. But I wonder during this time, if there's any reflections you might be able to offer related to leaders who are doing that well. What competencies are they really relying on that enable them? Maybe leaders who aren't doing that so well, what are maybe some things you can point to that might need to be sort of examined?
Well, just because that's probably familiar to many of us, the governor of Massachusetts, who in the interest of full disclosure is someone I used to work with, what I've been noticing, he laid out his stages of recovery plan last week. And I noticed that he is being criticized both by the people who want the recovery faster and by the people who want the recovery slower. Now that seemed to me to be a good sign, that he was not satisfying constituencies, but he was trying to use science and data and also political thinking. I don't think it is. I don't think this is just a question of science. It's also a question of politics, small p. How much can people take, and what does it mean for people to begin the pressure in the pressure cooker gets too strong, and is it worth taking the risk? It's about risk calculation. So I think that's a signal that he's somehow struck that right note between optimism and realism. I'm sorry, that's my wife's phone. Let me, okay. I think he's kind of struck the right tone. On the other hand, there are governors, I think, or political people in big positions in elective office that are listening to some constituencies more than others. This is, in the US, this is very difficult because we're 6 months out from an election. And it is very hard for anyone in elective office not to be cognizant of that and to be affected by that. And, I'm a lapsed politician. I started out in politics. I was a member of the Massachusetts legislature before you were born, Denise. It's really tough, I think, I'll bet. It was really tough to operate. It is really tough to operate under these circumstances. These folks are getting pulled in so many directions. And what I worry about is anybody who seems to be being pulled disproportionately in one direction or another. So I use the example of Trump playing golf because he was clearly sending a very strong signal to people, but he was sending a signal which was not, was very well received by some people and very badly received by others. I was listening to the governor of Michigan, who is a Democrat and who's been talked about a lot in the papers recently. I heard some interviews with her, and she was very unempathetic with the people who were pressing for quicker opening. And it was as if she was saying to them, just suck it up. This is the way it's going to be. Now that seemed to me an example on the other side of where her image of herself is, I'm just going to listen to the scientists and whatever they tell me. And what it did to me was undermine her delivering of the message, because it sounded so unsympathetic. Now, saying that, and given what you said, Denise, I think one of the realities, I try to monitor my emotional thermometer at least weekly. And last week was survivor's guilt. I was just, I couldn't stop thinking about how differential the impact of this pandemic is. My wife and I have been significantly inconvenienced. That's the way I would describe our experience. And there are some wonderful positives about this. A mile from me, there are hundreds and hundreds of people whose lives have been existentially challenged, their health, their financial security, loss of loved ones, and we're a mile away from each other, so the differential impact, and it comes as no surprise to you, Denise, that a lot of the cleavages in our society, which we can ignore in normal times when things are going well, are surfacing now, particularly around race and economic security. Our apartment building, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but our apartment building, which has about 75 units in it, we're on Central Park West in Manhattan, has been over half empty for over a month because people here have other homes that are away from the city, and they've been able to get away from the trouble, essentially, or have been able to rent homes. And 99% of the people on the face of the earth can't do that. The impact has been unbelievably differential, and it is absolutely unclear to me whether the cleavages that have surfaced and become so palpable will carry forward when we try to create the next normal. It's really powerful. I mean, it's just hard to imagine how, we don't have time on this webinar, but I've been on webinars where we went around the room and people talked about their situations, and they're completely different. Their experiences. I mean, living in these times when you've got two little kids at home is fundamentally different than living in these times when you don't have two little kids at home. I mean, it's a completely different life. It's not a tweak, it's 180 degrees. And that's just a fairly benign example of what I'm talking about. I have a friend who has 5 kids, and they range from 15 years old to 5 years old. And she is working full time to keep that family together, and it's not bad news. She sent me a video yesterday, which was just glorious. But it is a full-time, stressful job, and she had a double mastectomy 8 months ago. So it's staggering to me, the differential impact.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, Marty, for sharing all that. Absolutely. It is pretty amazing what can happen and how different realities can be for different people. Yeah. Marty, you touched on a little earlier on politicians and politics, and I just you mentioned it yourself. You've been a politician before, and you've been on the politician staff. So what are the best ways to work with politicians during these times? I know that that's a pretty common question that we get, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I want to underscore something that I said before, which is that politicians don't operate with a full deck 6 months before the election. It is really, if you're in elective office, this is a crisis. I understand that, but if you're in elective office and you're going to to a vote in 6 months from now, it is inhuman to ask you to not be affected by that. I think this is a very tough time, and to me, the best you can do is to be very empathetic with the pressures they are under and not expect them to perform in the same way they would perform the day after the election. Now, I know that is harsh, and it also may have negative consequences, but I think it is real life. You know, I was talking with some people a couple of days ago who were working with a local city council that had just been elected. They were elected in April. And she was telling me how completely different it is dealing with them now than dealing with them in March. You know, that she's able to have conversations with them now that she couldn't have with them in March. They're willing to listen now. They're willing to talk to people now that they wouldn't in March. And so I think it is a painful reality to say that when you're dealing with political people, under these circumstances, particularly those people who are up for election in the next 6 months, that it has to start by trying to be deeply empathetic to the cross pressures that they're facing and to the reality that their eyes are on election day. And given that context, so for example, let me give you an example. Between now and election day, people are going to pay much more attention to those people who can vote for them than those people who can't vote for them. So no matter how much of an expert you are, if you don't live in my district, if you can't vote for me in September or November when my election is, I'm not going to be as interested in what you say as if you were in my district. So if you are trying to bring some facts to the attention of an elected official between now and November, find someone who lives in their district who may not be able to sing the song as beautifully as you sing it, but they're going to have an avenue to be heard that you won't have. So that's an example of how you can be, without denying your responsibility to try to deliver that message, how you can deliver it in a way that will maximize the chance of being heard.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I believe that Sam, do we have other questions?
Yeah, so I think it looks like we have time for one more question. I'll go ahead and address this one that I most recently received, and this is from Alfred. And his question is, in this time of radical uncertainty of the pandemic crisis, there will likely be possible readjustments of some policies in the regulated industries. What can the regulator do to really so through formal or informal advices, what can they do to thrive and bring issues on the surface?
Well, I think to the extent that there is an opportunity, is an opportunity that is presented by the degree of disruption we're all experiencing. And so I would, if I was talking with a regulator, I would say, what kind of reforms, what kind of pet ideas have you been thinking about for the last 10 years that you might be able to surface under these circumstances? What could you try? What experiments could you try that you don't need legislation or the approval of elected officials for, but could run some experiments which might engage some people who could then have proof of concept when the politicians started paying attention again? So I would try to think of this as an opportunity to try some stuff. that maybe some stuff that you've been wanting to try for a long time, but the timing has never been right, or maybe some stuff that occurs to you because of the situation we're in. So I go back to Inman's conversation about, you know, in Pakistan, everybody now accepts that we live in a digital world. Well, you know, what are the implications for that for how you do business, or what are the implications? I don't mean that particular example, but as an example, you know, if you think about the new reality, for example, my guess is, and I don't know anything, I'm really stupid in this area. So, but my guess is, I've been thinking about this myself. What are the implications for the way I use energy and electricity by my behaviors in the last 3 months? You know, what am I doing differently? How can I think about the differences in the way that energy is supplied to me? What are the, you know, my son lives in Los Angeles. He's been living there for a quarter of a century, and he says this is the first time he's seen the sky in 25 years. Now, you know, maybe there are other people who feel that way, and maybe that has some implications for pollution. There was a piece in the Times yesterday in which it talked about the crisis in the meat industry because of the virus in the meatpacking plants. But one of the consequences of that is that cows that are responsible for so much of the pollution are not delivering all that gas, you know. Well, what are the implications of that? How can we capture some of that, if you're an energy regulator, into making something meaningful for people? I don't know. Those are just the kinds of things I think of. Trying to use this moment of disruption as an opportunity to move forward on something that you've been trying to do for a long time.
Well, thank you so much for that, Marty. We really appreciate that very much. I think I value everything you said. Like all of our PURC team said, you're such a great guy, and it was so very nice to meet you and learn from you today. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Samantha. It's really been interesting for me, and I wish we could have heard from more people about what their situations are, but I appreciate Inman and Sandra and for asking those questions. It's great.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Marty. Thank you everybody for joining us today. And well, we look forward to having some other time with you all in the near future. Thank you, Marty.
Thanks, Araceli. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Marty.
Stay healthy and stay connected to people.
You as well.
Great. Bye-bye.
Thanks.